We are the wind in the sails of your business. We are your compass. Chart your course towards your targets. Africa Business Radio. Towards a profitable Africa.
Africa is rising, they say. But Africa must rise with its people. There is no Africa without its people. How then do we harness Africa's wealthy people through social change and development? Social Conscience with NASA commits to Aspiration 6 of the Africa Agenda 2063 and the Global Development Goals. We advocate social change and development that will inspire the transformation that keeps Africa rising. Join us every week at 6:30 p.m. GMT +1. Of Social Conscience with NASA, right here at the Africa Business Radio studio in Lagos, Nigeria. I remain your host with the most, NASA. As you can tell, I sound very excited. I'm happy to be back here in the studio. It's been online conversations over the last couple of weeks for obvious reasons, but yes, it's great to be here, and I actually have my guest in the studio with me physically, my first ever physical guest appearance. Okay, so November is the month of the Global Entrepreneurship Week. And that's an initiative which seeks to celebrate innovators and launch startups that bring ideas to life. Each November, the program reaches millions of people of all ages and backgrounds through local, national, and global events and activities. With Africa's wealth in human capital and the countless talent mostly untapped, it only makes sense to have conversations about our entrepreneurial landscape and how to harness the opportunities therein. So today, I want to start with entrepreneurship as a tool for addressing development gaps. And I'm going to be making Nigeria's youth unemployment challenge the focus. So the topic for discussion is entrepreneurship or employability, addressing Nigeria's youth unemployment. I'm sure most people listening, if not all, know someone who has either finished uni and tried getting a job with no joy and proceeded to starting off something on their own. Like me, I have a 26-year-old brother who didn't get a job a couple years after graduating following several job applications, and he decided to start his own tech business in the real estate industry. As they say, necessity is the mother of invention. I dare say it has also birthed another child, entrepreneurship, in the African climes. I suppose when you get into survival mode, you start to explore the options available to you, and while that has also resulted in some distasteful activities amongst the unemployed Nigerian youth, we can't ignore the positive outcomes as well, especially within the tech space. Anyway, I'm looking forward to discussing this topic with a woman whom I had known of, but recently heard speak about employability and education, and her passion was so palpable, people. I knew I had to have her on the show. But before I invite my delectable guest to join me in conversation, please stay tuned as we go on a quick break.
We are the wind in the sails of your business. We are your compass. Chart your course towards your targets. Africa Business Radio. Towards a profitable Africa.
Africa is rising, they say. But Africa must rise with its people. There is no Africa without its people. How then do we harness Africa's wealthy people through social change and development? Social Conscience with NASA commits to Aspiration 6 of the Africa Agenda 2063 and the Global Development Goals. we advocate social change and development that will inspire the transformation that keeps Africa rising. Join us every week at 6:30 p.m. GMT +1. Welcome back, and if you're just tuning in, it's Social Conscience with NASA on Africa Business Radio, and the topic is Entrepreneurship or Employability, addressing Nigeria's youth unemployment. So earlier this year, sometime just when, the coronavirus broke out, we're locked down, the National Bureau of Statistics published the unemployment rate for 2020, and it was quite alarming at 27%. But beyond that alarming rate for me, some of the key insights in the report included: 1, graduates and postgraduates combined made up to 2.9 million of the total Nigerians that are unemployed. Then of the 35.5 million Nigerians that are fully employed, 22.2 million did not attain tertiary education level, and 6.29 million of them never attended school. Quite interesting, right? Then the vast majority of the fully employed people in Nigeria, about 13.2 million of them, have only senior secondary school certificates. So for me, I'm asking the question, what makes a graduate employable? And if the educated are unemployed and the less educated are employed? To address these questions and more, allow me to introduce my guest who will be sharing her views and expert assessment of the situation. Ms. Detoun Ogwo is a development and human resource practitioner, passionate about making a difference in the skills and youth employment sector. She's an Ashoka fellow with a 20-year career spanning various industries from the FMCG to Aviation and Financial Services. Currently, she sits on the board of the Skills Development Practice, the Abira Foundation, and was pioneer, executive director and co-founder of a national career center, AGDC. She's currently a doctoral researcher at the University College of London's Institute of Education and an external collaborator on the International Labour Organization's mapping process of Nigeria's National Youth Employment Inventory. Along strategic action lines of 4 E's, the employment, entrepreneurship, and employability and leadership. To my listeners, feel free to weigh in by sending your questions or comments to Africa Biz Radio on Twitter with the hashtag SCWN. Welcome, Ms. Ogwo. It's a great pleasure to have your beautiful self in the studio. As I was saying to you earlier, you're my first ever physical guest appearance since the show launched in October. So thank you so much for honoring me with your presence.
Thank you so much for having me. It's quite a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm excited about our conversation today, and I think that I want to start with you talking about what you do at the International Labour Organization, talking about mapping the process of Nigeria's National Youth Employment Inventory along the strategic lines. So you said the 4 E's. I see
equality and rights on the last.
Oh, right. Okay. So it's employment, entrepreneurship, employability, and equality and rights.
So entrepreneurship, employment.
Okay.
Employability
and equality and rights. Oh, gotcha. Okay, fantastic. So yes, let's start with that. What is it that you do? What does this mean for Nigeria's unemployment?
Okay, thank you very much for having me. And what I do on the mapping process, it's a process that started sometime in September.
Okay.
And the whole idea is I got a call from ILO Geneva and supporting the Nigerian government, the Ministry of Youth and Sports and Development specifically. There is a plan, there's an action plan that's evolving what is happening in the employment market, in the labor market, and coming up with a plan up until year 2023. So this is a process that's been going on. I'm sure you know about the economic recovery plan of government and all of that. So what the process is meant to do is showcase NGOs, multilaterals, MDAs that are working private sector, in tech space, the companies that are working. So a few interventions that are working, number of interventions that are working in that space, just to also strengthen the capacity of those institutions. The whole idea really is we want more employment in Nigeria. We want to be sure that there are more entrepreneurs in Nigeria. We want to be sure that the transition process from school to work is strengthened. There's efficiency in that space. Largely, so that's just a consulting brief to try to situate and also highlight, what is going on. As I said earlier on, if when we're getting ready for this, if there's a problem, you have to diagnose that problem.
Exactly.
And to deconstruct the unemployment in Nigeria or any nation state, there are frameworks, there are methods, there are ways and prisms of looking at unemployment. So it's just that people's lives are happening within that system. When you look at Nigeria, some of the things that influence high unemployment or high youth unemployment, as the case may be, is that we obviously need better macroeconomic policies. We have to ensure that the business environment is not hostile. We have to ensure that we have policies that ensure young people are also able to either, work and earn at the same time. We have to ensure that we have the right mix of policies that young people are able to transition. So there's a whole transition, so if you're going to dimension, without sounding too technical or boring, if you're going to dimension unemployment in any nation state, they're what you call quantitative dimensions. So the better an economy, the more employment that you will create. And they're also what you call qualitative dimensions. So the softer side of things, how people are learning, what's happening, how we're transitioning, people from schooling, learning. The whole idea of a labor market is that every human being has their own genius. They have their own wiring. There's, they have their own capabilities. The stronger economies in the world have just found a way to ensure that from the education, from the schooling side, there's similar. So they're what you call labor market information systems. So the better we have, if we have improved labor market information systems, we will have, low, people will be employed because they'll then be able to find where the opportunities are. Then to talk about entrepreneurship, we have to ensure that we're also promoting youth entrepreneurship. And then the last one. Is, we have to ensure that there are policies and programs that ensure people are then the transition process. So if we were, I wish we had an opportunity to show, this framework. But the way that if we were going to discuss a solution framework in Nigeria, is that's why we then have advocacy groups, lobby groups that are looking at policy, and there's so many policies. There's the National Employment Plan, there's the National Youth Plan. There's so many policies and programs within Nigeria that if for those of us on the private side, or those of us on the advocacy side, how we can then support that process and ensure that unemployment is happening at a macro scale is lobbying for accountability, lobbying for transparency in all of those areas. But having said that, I hope I haven't confused.
No, you haven't. I just have a lot of interesting questions because you're saying a lot of interesting things. And one of the things that struck me was, there are different actors here. And so there are the advocacy groups. And and you spoke to policies. So what are the advocacy groups supposed to do for those, to make sure that, so those policies exist, but are they actually being put into practice or is just there as a document?
I think that my recommendation is that in any nation state, the best thing to do is to measure results, not intentions. And we have to find a way, because, if you look back the landscape over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of spend on youth employment programs. So it's not for a lack of intent. It's not for a lack of what to do. And the amazing thing is, if you go into a lot of our policies, we discuss things like internship programs, we discuss things like
it's like the perfect plan.
So they're plans, and that's a discovery that I've also come up with. Of course, I'm not speaking in an official capacity on this, but just to also share some of the insights that there's intention. I think what has always been the challenge in this environment, if you ask ask me, collaboration, from the private sector, from firms. There's issues around curriculum review. Yeah. There are issues around ensuring that this transition process itself is strengthened. There are practices perhaps within our own firm levels that are not in sync with the supply side. So when I say supply side, the education system.
Right.
And when we dimension unemployment, we should also remember that it's not that it's multidimensional. There's so many. There are those who are not in school.
Yeah.
There are those who should actually be going through a vocational route.
Yes.
The countries that we want to be like,
the
countries that we always talk about that have a good system. If I'm going to dimension our problem as well as a country, is that we're sometimes not driven by either an ideology or philosophy of what we want education to do. So we have all these great plans. I think our history is also a factor. So we have different parts of we always just combine everything. We create a hegemony, we create a monolithic, everybody must fit into this, And if you look back into how we've done school to work transition in Nigeria, post-colonialism,
it's remained the same,
It's remained the same largely. So the system itself has not evolved into the contemporary realities of most numbers, the population growth that's happened. So we have a lot of young people who are still caught in that prison of workforce development where you went to school and you got a public sector job.
Yes.
But Nigeria has changed. Nigeria is no longer that. So we also the people who are the duty bearers just need to catch up with, education. We should start challenging the ways that we've done. Whatever it is that got us here is not going to get us into the future.
Absolutely.
So we have to start thinking about different ways of educating, different ways of people exiting the system, and what people can actually do. If you ask me to also dimension what I think is a fundamental missing piece of the puzzle, is that we're still credentialing. We're still certificating. People still exit school and then start looking for meaning, start trying to become. We are more than two pieces of cardboard as humans.
Well, that's what we're measured by.
There's a place for measurement and signals, and I will never, I will never take away from that, which is why I would be, doing research. But I think that it's part of the foundational flaws that we have, that we still are not challenging we all talk about the fourth industrial revolution. What is a human being, looking to do?
Designed for.
Learn, and then, find a way to make a living. We should question an education system that you pass through for years. Government spends a lot of money. The people then exit and cannot make a sustainable living afterwards. What is the utility of that education? So even the structuring, we need to find a way to reform that, so that when people exit the different tiers of the education system, they're able to function and they're able to fit. At the end of the day, employability is about fit.
Yes.
You've learned something, you've been qualitatively trained, and then someone is then you're not able to fit
into that organization or what they do. And you see, it's interesting that you talk about this, because when I was reading those stats, and I did an article on this, and I started to ask myself, so there's high levels of employment, but there are also graduates that don't have jobs. So, you can't say it's because people aren't educated, right? But there are people who haven't gotten to certain levels of education that are working. So is what kind of jobs are available? And so is this like a structural unemployment situation where it's just, it's based on, the macroeconomy and just basically lack of jobs? So some people say to me, there are lots of jobs out there, they just don't have the right skill sets to match those jobs that are available. There's that argument. Then there's also, but there are people who have jobs who haven't even gotten up to tertiary education. So what's the situation of Nigeria's unemployment? And with the work that you've done, how do you think that we can truly address that issue? And I've heard you talk about, other countries where, basically there's that seamless transition from school, but that's not the case in Nigeria. Like I mentioned, my brother at the beginning, he finished school, private school, in fact, and then he's gone into technology, and what he studied is definitely a far cry, and which a lot of us can relate to from what he's doing now. So how is Nigeria supposed to handle all of that? And that's the question.
So still takes us back to deconstructing some of the whys and how we've been operating. Now, I'll give a classic example about a particular country. When we sit down at conferences and we discuss, how these countries are doing very well, we talk about the dual education system. Now, I recently did a class on non-Western educational philosophies because it was important for us to contextualize our realities. If we're going to something that is not shifting, yes, we do have issues around leadership and all of that, but at least at a practice level, where are the distortions, and how can we start resolving those distortions in a way that the most numbers of people can express themselves, make a living. What I found was that in that system, and we've actually tried to practice that with the 6334 system in Nigeria.
I remember that.
The thinking behind the dual system is that education should help you to come into the fullness of your being. However, as humans, we're wired differently. We have different competencies, we have different wires. The baseline is that all of us that are placed on this earth have some measure of capabilities. What the education system ideally should do is first help you to identify your own quote-unquote genius. What my son calls your creative eminence. Help you to find that thing at the level of your core, and through the education system, unleash that for you, harness that for you. So the earlier we go back to that vocational counseling, enabling.
What point does that start?
That should start very early. That should start. So when you're identifying competencies, you're identifying people's areas of strength. Now, what the education system should, in that particular environment, does is to understand that, look, there are those who will take the knowledge track. There are those who will take the vocational track. If you look at the Nigerian structure, we have a lot of land. So areas of agriculture, so agripreneurs, issues around real estate. We need more houses. So the challenge sometimes is that
more houses?
Population growth, but there's population issues. So what we need to start also doing with the education is connecting our education system to the biggest of our problems.
True.
So people are going to need to feed. And there are also other distortions in the system that people also, we always say there's dignity in labor, but there are also premiums that we place on certain careers because of the earning capacity. The underlying issue also in all of these issues that we find ourselves in Nigeria is there's very high poverty. So people are also wanting to escape that with the highest numbers of, where is the biggest opportunity? In my personal experience, I've seen people that have put their lives on hold for 10 years, 15 years, because they just there's a signal of a particular firm they want to work in.
And
but they're not even able to speak the language of those firms, because those firms also tailor their recruitment processes to a sophisticated environment. Look, when you put money in a business,
but then are they not internet? Maybe
it's a legitimate quest for me to put money in a business and find the brightest and the best skills to also unleash my vision and create a profit for myself and make me a corporate socially responsible organization. So that is a legitimate quest. What we should be asking in Nigeria is for the most numbers of our young people, how do we capture that potential, and how do we coordinate either at the regional level, either at the state level, the most numbers into the most numbers of opportunities, starting with that. What the Germans call a Bildung philosophy. Everybody is uniquely wired.
The Bildung?
So the Bildung philosophy is about meaning. Everyone's going to be on a quest for meaning. Everyone's going to be looking for. So how do we help the education system help you to focus inward, and in focusing inward give you a compass with which you would now navigate uncertainty. So the uncertainty, so it's really more around career awareness. It's really more around helping people to understand their skills, then build the knowledge that they need, and kind of attitudes that the employer places a premium on. That employer might be a formal organization or might even be you yourself. If you become an entrepreneur, you don't want to be unemployable to yourself. You want to ensure that you have the mindset, the self-efficacy, let me use that word, the ability to lead yourself.
Absolutely.
So those are the dimensions in this very complex labor market that we find ourselves.
Very interesting and quite complex, I must say. But I liked and I wanted to get more on that dual education. So you speak to, and I don't know if you've spoken to the other side of it. So it's two. So it's two tracks. It's two tracks. So this one track is this helping you find your. So
the dual education system says some of us, let's focus on the brain. Let's work on more knowledge based. So those will be the technocrats. Those will be the ones that will go into the firms. And the majority that I find that we are yet to really focus on, we should be developing very strongly in Nigeria because of the way the economy is, because of the way the structure of of country is that technical vocational. So we need to start focusing more. What can you do with your hands?
So for that, there has to be a mind shift as well. So you know that growing up, if you go to the Polytechnic, then it means that you're less than, and it was just like an afterthought, and it's like you couldn't get into university, so you settle for Polytechnic. So there's this sort of, I don't want to call it a stigma, but people just sort of perceive you as not as bright because you didn't go to university. And when you talk about this dual education system, so the knowledge seems to be more celebrated, like going to uni. How do we change that mindset? Because it's one thing to say this is what will help unemployment situation and what other countries are doing, but it's also understanding that we as the people don't even respect that, going to a Polytechnic, for instance, because of the kind of skills. And it only makes sense to me, just logically thinking about it. But it's just that the stigma is the word I can think of right now that comes with going to Polytechnic. So you almost, after going to Polytechnic, you now say you're going to university to sort of make it look better. How are we going to address that?
I think it still goes back to some of the distortion in the labor market.
Okay.
My passion has been around how do we connect those dots.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to dimension a lot of issues, even the way, the premium that the young person places on. So there's a lot of what we call signaling theory. The premise is that, if you want the highest pay, then you should go to a university, which is legitimate in any environment. However, if you bring it home, if anyone is caught in this, there's one thing to be unemployed.
Yes.
There's another thing to bear the burden of not knowing what to do with yourself.
That's true.
So the fastest compass that you can, whilst government, let's assume government is, obviously I'm well aware that, at the policy level there's trying to be shifts and reform and all of that. You that you're the young person caught within this reality. There's something called your own identity, your own agency. You have to start focusing on some form of self-education to training yourself. Education itself is supposed to be instrumental. It's just supposed to help you to realize yourself. It's supposed to help you to find what are your goals, what is it that you want to do with yourself. Now,
It's so different from what we have in Nigeria.
But that's the purpose of I think what happened.
So prescriptive.
Yeah, it was very prescriptive, and it was almost like, there's still some discussion where people think, after all, I'm a graduate. I've had people, I've asked the question at interviews. I've had volume. I've had sometimes to shortlist from as high as a 96,000 database just for few people. And I remember the argument was maybe we should go to diaspora. But the argument is that the person who's schooled in diaspora has been schooled as a total human being.
Yes.
So remember I was talking about enablers earlier on. Earlier on in this year, I had to understudy a career center as part of my thesis.
Okay.
And a young man who had schooled in one of the Ivy Leagues walked into the career center.
Yeah.
At that point, his certificate, as strong in signal as it was, still needed that extra social, that psychosocial support.
Right.
That part of it that allows me to then look at you as an individual and say, okay, well, let's help you to understand your skill stock.
Yeah.
What is it that you're carrying that the person that you want to go and work with will place a premium on? That itself, that process itself is largely underdeveloped. Thank God there's been quite a lot
only in Nigeria? Nigeria? Or?
So this was not in Nigeria. This was in another environment.
Right.
Now, and I remember during the lockdown, this particular career service now started sending us apps on well-being, how to navigate the uncertainty, coping skills. So the premise is, and my husband was saying, "Oh, they're just looking after their fees. They don't want you to melt down." I said, "No. In design, that education system acknowledges that we're whole human beings. So even if you're coming with the knowledge, which is and your skill set, you're still a human being who's having a reality, who must be supported."
Absolutely.
So that is another dimension of our education system that we also then need to develop. And that's the soft skills part of employability that employers, because when you sit down and for an interview, largely I'm not looking to employ your certificate, I'm looking to employ you. So your understanding of who you are, your understanding of the difference that you're going to make. Let's look at it this way. The employer is, let's say, the patient. You that you're presenting your skills are the doctor. So you've got to be able to diagnose what it is that the firm needs and how you are the difference maker. For the employer, for the entrepreneur, we also have to connect the dots in a way that I'm a problem solver. I'm coming, I need to find a way to seek insight and gain, have this long-term thinking on what society needs. And, have a way of planning and problem solving in a way that, look, I'm not just wanting to escape poverty. I'm looking to add value.
And to feel like to feel fulfilled. Which is, wow. That was so, it's, education in Nigeria needs an overhaul, just like, the police force. Why I say that? Because in this article I wrote about my experience. So I schooled in Nigeria, my up to secondary school. And then I go to England to do my A-levels, and I had the shock of my life. So being, a well above average student at secondary school, I didn't think I was going to struggle. Like all I needed to do was just read, study, right? So I do my A-levels, and there's this particular teacher I had, lecturer if you call him, I don't know, it was A-level school, and he was teaching sociology. So he gave, he taught us all these things, all these theories and principles, etc. about sociology, and then he gives us a task to complete some essay. I do my essay thinking everything he's said in class, everything I've read, I'm just going to regurgitate, because that's again how I was taught. That demonstrates that I listened in class. The grade I got was a D. I was shocked. I said, oh no, this is not going the way we thought. So I thought, I started sort of thinking, could they be racist or what, Then I go and, ask him for feedback, like what exactly didn't I do right here? And he says, Chinasa, I wanted to demonstrate understanding, but what you did was just to basically give me back what I gave you. So at that point, I'm like, what do you mean demonstrate understanding? I heard everything you said, but at that point, something changed for me as well. And in fact, it was like I was freed from a mind prison that told me that what I thought was not necessary or important. And it was just what I was told I was. So like, when I mentioned being prescriptive, that's all I knew. Like the teacher says it's this way, then it must be. My other perspectives don't matter. And from then it was like I started to fly, because as I started to open my mind and come with my ideas, and I was getting good grades, so I was like, oh, okay, so I do have something in there. But a lot of my friends struggled with that, even staying back here, and it wasn't until they started working in organizations that they had that freedom of the mind to start to express their own opinions, because school just taught us not to. So I'm just then thinking, how practical and realistic is it for Nigeria to get to this point? Because even as it is, even with the private schools, it's still not quite there, And you talk about interviews with employers, and even with the interviewers, sometimes, because I go for an interview and I'm thinking, what, I know I can add value, and as I'm trying to demonstrate that, I'm still getting almost like prescriptive. Can you do this? Very technical stuff. I'm like, what? This is beyond. I want to make a difference here, and I think I have what it takes. And we're not there yet. So, with what you're doing at ILO, are we going to get there, and when?
I think what we need to understand is that we have to find a way of in evaluating and also deconstructing some of these issues, the dimensions of what we're caught in. For us to reform, our realities, we have to also be a bit clinical in let's look at the public education system in Nigeria. the infrastructural decays, teacher quality is an issue.
Curriculum.
We cannot look for an outcome where the input qualitatively has not been put in.
Sure.
So if we look at what we put into education, so there's a whole lot of...
But it's infrastructure. Well,
I mean, until we then leapfrog into teaching by technology.
Yeah, which I think is where we should be.
What the 6334 was supposed to do was a premise on, once you have the foundational skills,
right,
what the country might, is ensure that you have qualitative primary education and qualitative secondary education.
Okay.
At that age, once you exit that system, and I'll probably say one good place to look at is Madam Obi, one of my mentors, did a lot of work in reform and what, the kind of changes that we can stimulate real macro change.
Okay.
We have to think about a lecturer who currently has 100 students like you did. And I'll give you a practical example. I, for example, at my old age, in studying, got at least two of my papers also sent back. And what my lecturer said? Yeah. It wasn't reflexive enough. Not reflective. Reflexive. Reflexivity is, I've learned something. I've thought about it, and I've looked at the context in which I'm operating, and this is the meaning that I have made from what the lecturer said to me. I've gone to do further research. Right. I've not just been told, I have engaged the thinking I already have, that every human being is uniquely endowed with. So the baseline is everybody is uniquely talented. It's just the refining process. The stronger refining process in any nation state, the better the outcomes, the better the economy, the better the productivity. So the earlier we give young people that compass and say, whether you exit at primary, whether you exit at secondary, once you're able to be once you're in tune with that, sometimes it sounds a bit complex, but that is how some of these principles work. That is the whole purpose of education. And one philosopher in Africa that I went to look at his work when I started trying to deconstruct some of these issues, I use that word a lot, is in Yuri. And his purpose for education was that when someone goes through that process of learning, let them come out self-reliant, be able to feed themselves and feed at least their community, So that is still some kind of alignment, and that's the kind of things that, how do we ensure that even with the failing of, some of our systems, how does a young person, how do we implement programs that will build the skill set of our young people? How do we create opportunities through some form of social innovation and social entrepreneurship? So if you're a young person that you have above average education, there's a lot of scope for you within Nigeria to even start intervening in the education sector. Someone once said that crisis is, a dangerous opportunity. It's just an opportunity that seems to be covered. And you've seen in the last couple of months, last couple of weeks, that it's amazing what people that organize themselves and collaborate can do. So the challenges that we have are not to stymie us or to make us, give up. It might be an opportunity for us to start, really looking inward and also then asking ourselves, how, as reformers, yes, we're going to keep ensuring that we ask government to increase support. We need to start identifying stakeholders that are able to teach us and, create better conditions and support the younger generation. Because you cannot ignore the most numbers of your population.
I know.
And expect that the country will be productive. We need to find, so there are levels. That's what we're consulting and doing is, what are the levels that we can immediately shift? So if you're a young person, you can teach, please get within, find young people.
But don't you think that's happening already?
Not at scale.
Not in a structure, not at scale, right?
Not at scale. Not a scale. And
so, but then isn't that the good thing is it's happening somewhat? So, the people are actually taking the initiative to do something. Obviously, the ones that are doing the not so good things are there as well, of which, in fact, I say that those skills can actually be channeled positively.
Yes, definitely.
But, so how do we get this to scale? Government?
If you look at some work, it has to be collaborative. It has to be the person that who holds the most funds.
Private sector.
No.
Who? Government? No. This narrative is that government doesn't have money.
In the youth employment space.
Okay.
What we also have to start removing our brains from is that once we throw money at a problem, it's going to go away. Sometimes what we need to put to a problem is design.
Okay.
It's connecting the dots and the puzzle. What does a young person want or ask from a country? Unleash my potential.
Absolutely.
Help me to identify my potential. Transition me to a place where I can make a living. Even if I don't want to steal, I don't want to get into corrupt practices. There must be a system a place, a lighthouse that I can walk into that allows me, and then
to become.
I'm beginning to think that we also have to start looking at competencies, because a lot of times I've sat in Lagos and done a lot of youth development programs, and I've trained thousands. But I've then gone into another dimension where I'm interfacing with graduates from 36 states of the country, and realizing that maybe what we need to start doing is start looking for regional competencies. What are the products in that environment that we just need to connect young people to? What are the strengths and capacities? We're such a driven people. We're such an amazing people.
I mean, they say what's it called? Wealth is in our human capital.
Definitely. That is greatest. I mean, so how do we unleash that? How do we leverage that? What are the enablers? So there's a lot of work around innovation hubs. Where do people get into? So when they are confused, or look at like the young man who came into the career center and understood it, even though he had a good credential, he still needed direction. Right. So we must also have this lifelong learning approach. It's not when you get a certificate you say that's done.
It's not done.
And self-education is also part of your education. So to answer your question around, I work within a university community right now here in Nigeria. I mean, I collect some data, and I've seen that they have good, fantastic ideas. They also feel quite vested in making sure that their graduates leave the schooling system capable and ready. They even have a curriculum that they're discussing problem solving, so that the young person goes through the curriculum, but they're still what we've also had is little pockets of excellence. What we're saying is the need that we have as a country right now, we need to be macro scaling some of those things. And like yesterday, because people's lives are still caught in this, not so ideal situation. To leapfrog that, all of us have to be system changers. All of us have to have that system change making prism. We're going to have to find a way to do more with time. We're going to have to find a way to master even our own individual lives. We're going to have to find a way to collaborate, and that collaboration is key.
But what do you think is preventing that collaboration? Is it that people don't see the value?
I think that...
Is it that people don't trust themselves?
I think there's a trust issue. Because sometimes you see a lot of private firms doing exactly the same thing. And all of us are really... One of the things I love about being a Nigerian is that we do have a strong community focus. Relative to... you've lived in other climes.
Yes, exactly.
So we look out for each other. We do.
Maybe as much. I think there's a bit of self-centeredness, which is why I think that's why this collaboration isn't fostered. If you ask me, everybody wants to be the best by themselves. So it's like if I pull resources together where we can actually achieve more together, basically synergize, I want to be the one to stand out. And from first-hand experience, I know of organizations that will be thinking, so whose name is going to be there? Who's going? Do you understand?
That's a human... I mean, in any environment, human beings will...
I don't find it very good.
I think what we need to... when I saw the coalition when the pandemic broke out, I'm in quite a number of groups. I'm in a reform group. I actually asked myself, what would it take for us to create some kind of coalition around education in a way that all this work that people, and there's a lot of good work, but sometimes if I'm in Port Harcourt, you're in Abuja, I'm in Lagos, and we're using that prism to resolve some of the problems, then that's already a design problem. How do we also have this evidence-based approach to programming in Nigeria? There's scope to do a lot. We saw when the numbers that created them, because those are the ones that are not enabled. They have not been given a compass or direction for life. They also value dimensions to a lot of the issues that we have as a country. So really, education would be one pivot. The family itself, and our institutions of learning, so our religious institutions also have an orientation role to play. Every human being wants to thrive.
How does the family play its role if the education... So I also wonder about this, because I think education comes from different angles. So there's the formal education, that happens within the four walls of the school, as we say, and then there's the informal bits. But then if there's a pervasive ideology or a way of being that contradicts what's being taught at the schools. And I just don't think that there's that unification, if you like. Like, it doesn't come together so that I'm taught a certain thing in school to be a certain way, to be open-minded, and then at home I'm told, you don't speak, you're not supposed to express yourself. How does that happen? How do you make the family units or institutions be more at one with that whole what do I call it now, that perspective or a way of educating? Okay,
I think that maybe that's where leadership and maybe country vision also comes in. Whether we like it or not, there's room for us to reform our societal values at a macro scale in a way that we're also, how are we teaching conceptual thinking? Yeah. I recently collected data from a community of HR, quite a number of friends, and I confess to you, after collecting the data but there was a particular question I asked around conceptual thinking or higher order of thinking. Yeah. I have 4 kids. That week, the only thing, once my kids spoke to me, the only response I gave to them was, what do you think about it? Because I found that you have to unleash that part of of a human being, the ability to think at a different level. Because, as we say,
and freely.
But the cultural, I would never agree with the cultural value of disrespect. So there's respect, there's reciprocity. That word. There's responsibility. Yes. The reason why, I remember when I told my dad once I wanted to study a different course. My dad was like, "Oh no, then you have to take responsibility for yourself." But then it occurred to me. But those were their own ways of, so there are also cultural evolutions that are upon us. Right. In reforming our society, what we must also be true to is who we are as Africans, who we are as Nigerians. We take the good practices from other environments, but we don't lose ourselves totally. So it's a balancing, so to play the balancing act. I loved what I saw. The things that I could not voice to my parents that my kids are voicing to me now.
My 7-year-old.
But that critical analysis. But then, if I remember one day, my husband said, "Well, you're the one that wants them to." But how do you build a new system? How do you build a new country if we are not able to get people to engage? Because critical analysis is key to progress. You can't do things the same way and expect a different outcome. There's a definition for that. Yeah.
Wow, you know what? We're almost running out of time, and there's so many questions, and it's so interesting how this topic has just gone in different directions. And I found even topics within what we've discussed. But just taking it back to the topic today, and sort of almost round up, we're talking about employability and entrepreneurship, and as a solution to Nigeria's youth unemployment. Would you say that it's one over the other, or both are important? And would this happen from school? So I think that entrepreneurship is a mindset, and you can do it within an organization or outside of it. So what's your view on those two tools or solutions to unemployment?
I would say that the two sides of a coin. Okay. If you gave me a personal option, when I started my career in human resources, and that career started for me from going to speak to a counselor, and helped me to see my areas of competence, and then I was able to navigate my way into the labor market myself and own that process myself. I would say that it was when it was a problem solving. That kind of problem-solving method thinking that then got me to say, maybe I should embrace entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship was not something that I might have jumped on, but it was a way to express what I feel that is on the inside. It was, I saw a problem. Young people were not able to pass interviews. Why don't I start why don't I? And then I went into a partnership. So really, it's not one or the other. If you start a business, you don't want anyone that's not fit to come and run the business for you. So I would say both. My answer to your question at the beginning was both.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ms. Ogwo. Detoun, as you say, actually. Thank you. It's been a very, very insightful conversation. I wish we could go on, but we haven't got much time. Just to quickly summarize some of the things I got out of the conversation. is that, we need to, have an education system that is lifelong, and people need to self-educate as well. Just to close this, I'd like to say entrepreneurship for me is not a fad, and it's beyond having freedom from accountability, because that seems to be what most people think. In fact, what it is a necessary mindset of ownership and self-leadership that can be demonstrated within an organization or in bringing your own ideas to life. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a great conversation with Detoun Ogwo. Thank you very much for staying tuned. And as we continue to discuss entrepreneurship in Africa this month of November, please tune in for another insightful conversation, same time, same station next week. And I am yours conscientiously. Africa is rising, they say, but Africa must rise with its people. There is no Africa without its people. How then do we harness Africa's wealthy people? Through social change and development. Social Conscience with NASA commits to Aspiration 6 of the Africa Agenda 2063 and the Global Development Goals. We advocate social change and development that will inspire the transformation that keeps Africa rising. Join us every week at 6:30 p.m. GMT +1.
We are the wind in the sails of your business. We are your compass. Chart your course towards your targets. Africa Business Radio. Towards a profitable Africa.